You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong, and as always, happy to be back with you on another day, another week. I got my workout in this morning, which, honestly, for 15 years or so, I stopped working out. Kids got in the way, job got in the way, and I just kind of stopped prioritizing my health. And so it's good to finally get back there. I'm 40 now and reclaiming that. So hopefully we'll get to be a little bit more slim, maybe look swole a little bit, No, I'm just kidding. It's a good day. So the endorphins are there, feeling good. We're going to talk some Utah football. It was a crazy weekend with some news. We're going to get into all that. So just a preview of what this episode is going to be for those that may want to bounce early if you want. We'll see. I recommend you stay to the end. But what we're going to do today is we're going to briefly recap the official visits and the recruiting update from this last weekend. We'll dive into the newly signed house settlement case and what it means for college football and Utah. Phil Steele, released his magazine today, and so we'll see where he has Utah. Surprise, it's good. And then we'll continue on with our schedule look by jumping into West Virginia and Arizona State. And that gets us to halfway through Utah's schedule, which means we're getting closer to Big 12 Media Day. I said I have these broken down into weekly segments per the schedule, so 2 games per week. We've got just a few more weeks left, and then it's Big 12 Media Day. And then that really kind of starts kicking into gear, kind of the fall season, right? Like it's still at the beginning of July, and so there's still a lot of things to do that are kind of the doldrums of summer. But it starts to kind of kick off some of the conversation about football. And so, looking forward to that, looking forward to getting back into this. Obviously, summer's a great time to kind of recharge and get out there and just kind of live your life without feeling like you have to have the demands of work or whatever it may be. But we're getting close to football again. It's still far away, but we're getting closer. So before we jump in, let me tell you about our partners, Canyon View Credit Union. Every possibility begins with a spark, and possibility can grow into something even better than expected. With a clear view of what matters most, your possibilities are endless. From its first flicker at the University of Utah, UFirst Credit Union has grown to meet its potential and ignites your possibilities. They've grown into Canyon View Credit Union. Same roots, new path. Welcome to Canyon View Credit Union. Check out the full details at canyonviewcu.com. All right, let's jump right into this. So we'll jump into the official visits. And look, I don't have all the full details of that, right? Like that's pretty private stuff. There's, the individual intimate details without talking to the players. You're not going to get everything, and that's not intended to necessarily go public. This is just more of the opportunities for Utah to kind of showcase their program to the world, right? And so you're having a lot of these athletes come through, and about 9 or so officially visited. We'll get that full official number here soon. But that's about how many recruits came in on an official visit for the 2026 class. This is another big-ish one. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the time you listen to this, there will be a few commits that have been announced based by these players. By all accounts, it sounds like it was a good weekend, that there was a lot of love for the University of Utah, and there's a good chance that one or a few commits will come out of this group. So just looking at kind of the quote-unquote stars of the official visit, Utah's going to go heavy, as I've mentioned, on the offensive line. And they decided to bring in 4-star offensive tackle Colin Campbell. He's the number 1 recruit out of Arizona. If you remember, Utah's number 1 recruit. They've brought in, Nevada? Now I'm blanking on it. Yeah, I believe it was Nevada. No. Excuse me, Idaho. My bad. And then now the number 1 recruit out of Arizona. So they're going big. It's no surprise that a lot of these guys are offensive linemen. Utah's number 1 is obviously the athlete, Celesi. And so we'll get kind of more into that as it goes. But so yes, you have the 4-star offensive tackle Colin Campbell, as I mentioned, number 1 recruit out of Arizona. That'll be a big get if that's where Utah can go. You then have 3-star QB Michael Johnson. He's from Georgia. Obviously, Utah needs a QB. They're building the depth. You obviously like what you've got with Isaac Wilson and Burt Ficklin and some of the other talent that you're getting in there. But you always have to recruit quarterbacks, right? And so that's the important thing here to be able to see. If you believe kind of the bat signals that are put out there, Coy Detmer put out a tweet that kind of indicated something good happened from the movie Like Mike. I would assume that maybe that's an indication that Michael Johnson may commit to Utah. I'm just reading the tea leaves on that one, right? At least the public tea leaves on that one. And so, there's a good chance that Utah has picked up another quarterback, and so we'll see. Outside of that, the rest of the visits were essentially another O-lineman and then skills players who have running back, wide receiver, tight end. And so there was a lot of emphasis on the offensive side of the ball for this official visit. So that's essentially what I'm going to get into for this one. Like I said, by the time you listen to this podcast, there's a good chance that you'll see a commit or two or a few more as part of this. And so I'm really curious to kind of see what happens there. This week, again, is another busy week. You actually get more official visits coming in on Tuesday. So you get about 3, if I've done my math right and have done my reporting right, we'll see. And then on Saturday, about 6 or so. So that's about another 9 more coming through this week for Utah. So it's still busy leading up to the busiest day of June 20th. So that's that. So keeps moving on. Pretty crazy. That's the nature of this business. It's never a dull moment, and so we'll see how it goes. Now, with kind of the transition here, over the weekend, late Friday night, there was this important document that was signed, and it was called the House Settlement, right? We've been talking about this forever, and I'm sure there's many of you that don't even know what this is. There's many of you that are very well versed in this. I don't blame you on either side of the aisle, with what you're at, right? Like, court cases are not exactly the most entertaining unless you want to be a lawyer or you're interested in this stuff. As part of my job, it's my job to kind of pay attention to this stuff and give you the information. So there's going to be many questions, and I guarantee you, I've talked about this a bunch of times, and I understand that, I'm going to keep hitting new people every single time, and I hope that I can get you some. So I'm going to give you a real brief overview. I don't want to bog you down on the details. I really want to get into some other stuff here, but this is transformative in the nature of college athletics, right? Like, this is one of the biggest things that is going to happen in college athletics, and there's going to be many people that don't really kind of think about it, right? So essentially what this is a court case, trying to get, money for back payments for athletes who were, used under the guise of amateurism in college athletics, dating back to at least 2016. Obviously, this has happened longer, but that's when this lawsuit starts. And so you're going back there. So as part of this, the settlement, so they didn't have to go to actual court, the settlement came down where the NCAA and, the plaintiff house decided to settle, and they had a bunch of stipulations. There's a bunch of money that's going to be paid out to past players, yada yada yada. Moving forward, this is kind of the nature of what it's going to be. So what it means for schools, and if you want a deeper dive on this, I did an episode a few weeks ago. I tweeted about it last weekend after the news, so you can go back and listen to that if you need a quicker look. But this is just going to be real brief. What essentially happens is schools can share as much as $20.5 million now with athletes. So as part of their athletic revenue, they can now give up to $20.5 million. Now, you don't have to give up to that much. You could give $2 million if you want. I don't know the value of giving $2 million to all of your athletes, but there's obviously going to be different athletic departments, even within the Power 4 structure, that are going to struggle to consistently do this, right? And we're still not to the level of where we understand what this is going to be. I would bet by and large the Power 4 teams are all going to be at that $20.5 million this year, just to stay competitive, just to see what it looks like. Each July, you essentially have to declare if you're going to be in or out. And if you're in, you do have to pay up to that amount. Not, like I said, up to that amount. You can pay whatever you want. Like I said, also, most schools are going to be probably around there in the Power 4 structure. The challenge comes with the group of 6 teams that clearly aren't going to have as many funds for this, and so I'm really curious to see kind of how that goes. I'm thinking of like a Utah State here in Utah. What does that mean for a program like that? How much can they actually fund out of their athletic department toward athletes? Now, there's an escalator clause in this settlement that basically says that this will go up each year. So by the time this settlement finishes out in 2035, that'll be up to about $33 million for athletic departments. Obviously, that goes with a bunch of changing landscapes in just the whole economic world, whether it be inflation or other stuff. That's just kind of a natural kind of escalator for that. So up to 33 million, by 2035. Like I said, schools have to opt in by July 1st of each year to say if they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, I'm assuming you probably risk some situations within your conference. I would assume most Power 4 teams have to do that, and I'll get into why they'd have to do that here shortly. But you also have schools can distribute this at their discretion. You could have a school that goes all in on basketball. You have a school that goes all in on football, but they still have to distribute it throughout their programs. So a school like Gonzaga, for example, which doesn't have a football program, this is a huge opportunity for them because they can invest a ton into basketball and remain competitive, whereas schools like, let's say, Alabama, they're going to focus in a ton more on football. They still have to divvy up money for basketball, but maybe you start seeing a team like Gonzaga having more sway in the basketball world. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. What I would assume, this is at least based on a lot of the kind of historical data on what teams were kind of getting around to. This has been reported on by several national reporters. This is the numbers that were used essentially as part of the settlement as well. The expectation is that most football programs in the P4 structure will probably spend 75 to 85% of that $20.5 million on football. That sounds like a lot, but at the same time, football brings in the majority of the money for most of these places, and so there's obviously larger rosters, but it brings in the most revenue. And so if you're going to attract top-end talent, you've got to do it at that sport. Then there's about 10 to 15% in basketball. That's obviously going to change depending on your interest level in basketball and football. That's still also a money-making sport. How that's divvied up, we'll see. Like I said, Gonzaga, they're not going to be at 75, 85% to football. I would assume that that's probably closer to basketball for Gonzaga if they get up to the $20.5 million. Other sports will be a remaining 10 to 15% or so. I mean, those numbers don't always jive, right? Like, I get that the math isn't mathing there. It's somewhat, if you take it however it is. But there's an approximation there on kind of what it is, right? And so you'll have different schools go do different things. Utah's already announced, Mark Harlan put it out there today as well. He's done this in the past, but he put it out there today in a letter that he sent out to the public that they're going to be all in, right? So they're going to go up to the full $20.5 million. They haven't decided yet, according to his letter, what they're going to divvy up, how it's going to work out, what that distribution will be. I would assume that all that will be public eventually because they are a public entity. We'll understand that a little bit more, and we'll get chances to talk to him. But there's some intrigue there on what that means. As I mentioned, that's $20.5 million. Now, as part of this sets roster limits. There's no cap on scholarships up to that limit, right? So for football, for example, there's 105 total roster spots. You can't go over that. It's not, you can have 105 people on scholarship and then have walk-ons. It's 105 total. And so within that, you don't even have to give all of those players scholarships. You can still have walk-ons. You can now also give partial scholarships, so you can give somebody half credits. You can give them full scholarship, that kind of stuff. It's basically a proportional system now, similar to what a bunch of other college sports have been. And so all programs will be that way, right? It's not one person, one full scholarship. It can be one person, 3/4 scholarships, or whatever it may be, divvied up based on the school. I would assume football and probably basketball and all those will probably have a majority of those being full scholarships, but obviously the schools will divvy up that how they want. So walk-ons will still exist, but they do have to fall within that limit. There's also a grandfather clause, and so there may be some programs that operate under, the 105 limit, but they have to be tabbed early on. So if there were players that Utah, let's say, had 110 players, and some of those were scholarship or some of those were walk-on players, they can grandfather those in for this season to basically say we don't have to cut down to 105. We want to keep it at that. There's going to be a lot of programs that do that. There's going to be a lot of programs that go under that 105. We'll see how it goes. Right now, according to my math, Utah is over that with some walk-on guys. We'll see if they designate some of these guys as grandfather claused or they get down to the 105. Truthfully, I don't know that really matters, okay? Beyond that, as part of this settlement, there will be this entity called the College Sports Commission. This is basically the entity that is going to look at NIL, kind of oversee a lot of what this settlement is. They've already hired a CEO in Brian Seeley. He's the former assistant U.S. attorney and an MLB vice president of investigations. So he has a ton of experience in this kind of world. Yes, it's not college football, but he's a lawyer, has a lot of experience in kind of what this means and kind of the legalities of all this. Now, that's not to say that this won't be challenged in court, but regardless, all the conference commissioners were pretty solidly happy about Brian Seeley. Look, I'm not going to say that I know anything about him. Just know that this is a guy that is very experienced and that the commissioners are all excited about him. They feel like he is going to be the one that can be a great leader for this and really help the group. Am I boring you yet? Yes, I'm trying to move fast. As part of this is this NIL clearinghouse, which is handled by Deloitte. Basically, anything over $500 or was it $600? Either way, it has to go to this clearinghouse to be able to say if it is true NIL, meaning, is this based on your name, image, and likeness? This isn't a pay-for-play payment, right? I've already talked about this in the past, but something like 90% of private deals would have gone through, according to Deloitte, in past NIL situations. Collectives, not as much. I think it was something like 30 or 40. I'd have to go back through my numbers there to get there. 30-40% would have gone through. The remaining would have been denied. There can be appeals process, but for the most part, the intent here is you want to get private businesses or entities that way giving quote unquote true NIL, whatever that means. I don't want to get bogged down into that. But as part of this, the Power Four especially is trying to finalize a document that will kind of bind all these schools together, that will put some teeth behind what this enforcement will be. You're essentially not allowed to trump state or this Trump state laws. I've talked about in a past episode what Tennessee tried to do. I'm not going to get into that. You can go back and listen to that. This would basically bind all these schools together and say, yes, this NIL go / what Brian Seeley and his commission are going to do is the enforcement arm of what we're trying to do. And so there's these quote-unquote guardrails, rules, whatever you want to call them, that will basically keep this in place. And schools that, don't follow these rules, how dare schools do that? That's never happened in the history of college football. They will face punitive damage, and so on one hand, you're going to see still under the table deals like we used to have in the past, but it could also provide some more teeth to what has been kind of the wild, wild west of NIL. So there are some opportunities here. That document is still being finalized. It hasn't been signed, but I know Brett Yormark today commented and said, quote, "Our schools want rules and we're providing those rules. And if you break those rules, the ramifications will be punitive." They all want this. They all say that they want this. Greg Sankey came out and said it's easy to sit here in a boardroom and say we all want this and then to do it on the field, right? It's easy to come together as all coaches and say, oh, yeah, we're obeying the rules. And then, once you get into the real world, things change. And so there's going to be these rules. There's going to be different things. You would hope, at least from a college football, college in general standpoint, that there would be true teeth here, that this wouldn't be kind of how the NCAA does things in the past, where it was just kind of glossed over and everybody was allowed to cheat. That's still going to be cheating. I'm not, let's not be naive to the situation, but there's potential that this could help. And I'm putting very heavy emphasis on could, because, it's just the nature of it. So a lot here with the house settlement case. There's, so much that can be going into it. By and large, you don't have to worry about it as much, in the sense that, if you just want to come and watch the football or basketball or whatever it is, not much is going to change for you necessarily. Obviously, fees are going to go up, I'm assuming, for different programs. They're going up every year, so this isn't a change. Ticket sales are going to be more expensive, all those types of things that, I can hear you complaining about, and I get that. That is what impacts you. And so there's going to be that kind of stuff, especially as these programs try to figure out how to pay $20.5 million to their athletes. But on the bright side for the athletes, they're now getting paychecks from their schools. There's going to be creative ways, I'm sure, to kind of distribute this and kind of entice athletes to come. But at the same time, this should help with some of the wild, wild west aspects of NIL. It's still going to be crazy. This doesn't necessarily change anything. It just means now that there's a clearinghouse that will oversee it. Okay. Are we here yet? We're boring you. We're 20 minutes into this, and I don't want to get too far into that. So just know that it's a huge, there's huge ramifications in the state of college sports. We'll see what it actually means, but by and large, the product on the field should hopefully be the same, at least in terms of kind of what you've come to expect in this new era of athletes being paid. All right, let's jump into Phil Steele. This is where people get a little bit more excited. Nobody cares about the settlements. Nobody cares about the court cases. We want to talk football. So Phil Steele, you can love him, you can hate him, you can do whatever you want with it. It's magazine season, essentially, right? You've got Athlon Sports, you've got Phil Steele, you've got our guy Pick Six Previews that we'll have on later on this season to talk about different things. There's a lot of these magazines that out there are projecting different things, and they do a ton of work, right? Like me just doing these breakdowns of these teams every single week, I can see how challenging it could be. And I'm still kind of scratching the surface of what these teams are. These guys are going into the nitty-gritty. They're finding, turning every rock over, trying to find any little edge to understand what these teams are. They're talking to coaches. They're talking to all kinds of people to kind of understand how all of these FBS teams are going to do. And so, mad respect to these guys who put in the hustle and do it. And Phil Steele, among many of these other program or magazines, have done a phenomenal job of predicting. Now, at the same time, they're predictions, right? Anything could happen. We've seen in years past, aka last year, Utah was picked high and injuries derailed it. The team, didn't really kind of jive together for a long time because of that, and things snowballed and things went bad. Florida State, for example, was terrible after being, expected to do great things coming off an undefeated season. Things like that happens, right? And so, once again, these are all projections. And this is how Phil Steele sees this. This is his team. It's not just him. It's his team putting it out there. They look at ratings. They look at returning talent. They look at a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm not saying all this to kind of prop up these rankings by any means. It's more just a look at kind of what they do, right? As somebody that has to do preseason rankings for the Associated Press, this is not an easy task. And there's always something you're going to miss. There's always something that's going to, somebody can complain about. But at the end of the day, it's just an early look at kind of how teams are viewed, right? That's kind of my best explanation for it. It's just kind of how is your program being viewed going into the season? And some of that is going to be based on brand. Some of that is going to be based on trajectory. There's a lot of those different things. And so it's really fascinating to kind of see how this all goes. But let's jump into it. So first off, his preseason top 40. So he ranks 40 teams. That's what he's done. I'm just going to tell you the Big 12 teams that are inside that top 40. And if I'm doing my math right there, 7 teams make that top 40 list. The first team on that list is all the way at number 13, which I think is fair, and that's Baylor. He sees Baylor as the top team in this conference. He sees them ranked 13th in his preseason top 40. Really fascinating to kind of see there. There's a lot of upward momentum for them, as we've talked about. A lot of excitement about what Baylor can be with Sawyer Robertson. We'll dive into them a little bit more later this month once we break down that game that Utah has in Waco. So you've got that. Number 18 is one and only Utah. Now, that may surprise a lot of people. I think a lot of people coming into this season aren't going to say that Utah is a top 25 team preseason, right? Once again, this is all projections based on kind of what he sees, right? But he still is high on Utah in the sense of what they've been able to bring in, what they have returning, and that kind of stuff. And so this is a projection based on how he thinks this Utah team can be, and he thinks this Utah team can be good. We've seen this in the past where it's easy to project a team and something falls, as I've said. Number 21, Iowa State. Number 23, Arizona State. Number 24, Kansas State. So pretty kind of loaded right there from 18 to 24. There's a lot of teams in the Big 12 right there in that area. You can even jump in at number 29 with Texas Tech, which is a lot lower than a lot of people are having Texas Tech. I'm really fascinated to kind of see how that goes. We talked about them last week. Obviously, we'll have a ton of talent on the field just from the transfer portal. The question is, can it all come together? Based on this, Phil Steele is saying it's going to need some time, right? And then number 36, lastly, is TCU, which is kind of the one thrown out there that's a little bit odd at times too. But, good program. We'll see what happens there. So that's your preseason top 40 in the Big 12. Really interesting. I don't know that that's how I would have expected it to go. I would have thought Arizona State would be a little bit higher, but we're going to talk about Arizona State here in a second. And I can give my reasons why I think that it's as low as it is. I mean, being 23 is not low, but you get the point. Now, looking at the Big 12 projected finish. So this is how he sees every single team coming into the season. You can love it, hate it, like I said. Essentially, he's broken it up into 4 top tiers, and then the rest is just kind of the remaining teams, okay? So you have Tier 1, which is 3 teams, Tier 2, which is 2 teams, Tier 3, 2 teams, and Tier 4, 2 teams. How he has it broken down, and he lists it as number 1 being Baylor, Utah, and Iowa State. Obviously, from those top 40 rankings, you kind of figured that. So he sees those 3 essentially in his rating model as kind of the top, right? These are the teams that are most likely going to compete for a Big 12 championship. Fascinating to me. That goes counter to a lot of what people have said. Goes counter to a lot of what I kind of believe, but we'll see. Next tier, so ranked number 4, is Arizona State and Kansas State. I think those are fair, right? I think both of those teams could be in that top tier as well and compete. I think both of those tiers are probably pretty close. Next tier, so Tier 3 would be this is ranked number 7 in his rankings, TCU and BYU. So if you were to expand that top 40, it looks like BYU would just be outside of that. I don't know if he's factoring in the Jake Retzlaff stuff. I don't know where that falls into it. Quite honestly, I haven't had a chance to dive into every single team in his magazine and kind of what he sees. But interesting nonetheless. I think if Jake Retzlaff's off of that, that's probably fair. If he's on it, I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to see what this BYU team is, and we'll get into that one next week as we break them down as well. The last tier of the quote-unquote, competitors, in my view, based on his rankings, are Cincinnati and Kansas. These are 2 teams that seem like they'll be on the outside looking in. They could be teams that challenge for it, have some good momentum for themselves, but still have something to prove. I think that's fair. I think those are fair spots for those 2 teams. And then lastly, he has number 11 Houston, number 12 UCF. He also has number 12 Colorado, so those 2 teams tied there. And then lastly, it's number 14 Oklahoma State, number 15 Arizona, and number 16 West Virginia. And we're going to jump into West Virginia here in just a second. So we'll get into this. I think those bottom rankings are probably pretty fair. I think the top is fair as well. Honestly, any of those top 7-ish, 8-ish teams, I think have a real shot of claiming a championship. there's any of those teams at the bottom that could, in theory, we saw that last year with Arizona State. It just depends on how the breaks are, what kind of team they are going into the season, that kind of stuff. But however you slate these teams, and I would probably slate these different, as I'm going into my Big 12 Media Day rankings, I would slate it a little bit different. But, I think this is a fascinating look at how Phil Steele views it. It's not just a 1-to-1 year ratio. It's looking at kind of trends. It's looking at, how programs bounce back, that kind of stuff. So obviously really high on Utah, really interested to see how that, shapes up for the Utes. But that's the name of the game. So with that said, let's jump into our schedule preview. We've got West Virginia as the next game on the schedule. This is coming off of Utah playing Texas Tech at home. So there could be a real challenge here with Texas Tech. They may be still a team that is trying to figure themselves out 4 weeks into the season, and curious to see where Utah is at. Utah could be very good. Utah could be bad. You could be in the middle. It's hard to know, right? And so coming into this West Virginia game is kind of an interesting situation because you're traveling on the road in the furthest distance that you possibly could go, arguably outside of going to Florida. But this is not an easy task, right? You're going cross-country, and cross-country trips are never an easy situation for teams. You also have a West Virginia program that there's so much unknown with. This is a team, as I mentioned previously, is ranked number 16. There's not going to be a ton of expectations for this team just based on kind of what it went through. How this shapes up is this game will be played on Saturday, September 27th. West Virginia, they have 2 tough games coming into this. So it's not like Utah's got these tough games and are going into West Virginia, who's had an easy slate. This is 2 teams that are going to have an interesting situation on their hands based on what has happened the past 4 weeks, right? If West Virginia has built some momentum, there's a good chance that this is a tougher game than we're projecting. Right now, it looks like a win for Utah just simply based on the optics of how these 2 teams are, right? But never buy into that. These are not easy situations, especially if Utah is spiraling and West Virginia's got the upward momentum. It's tough to predict. Coming into this game, though, West Virginia will be playing in week 3, so 2 weeks prior, their really heated rivalry against Pitt. So that'll be tough. That's at home. And then they have to travel to Kansas the week before going to play Utah at home. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how this shapes up, what it looks like. And then they get to travel to BYU the week after Utah. So it's not going to get any easier for West Virginia, but really fascinating game. West Virginia last year finished 6-7. They were 5-4 in Big 12 play. They were decent, right? They weren't anything great. They weren't anything bad. But as a result of that, they ended up losing their head coach, Neil Brown. They let him go after 6 seasons and moved on and got Rich Rodriguez, who you may be very familiar with in his time in the Pac-12. And so he takes over as the head coach and offensive coordinator. He's already been the head coach at West Virginia. And so there was, some mended fillings that needed to be made. But by and large, the Mountaineers are very happy with who they have as Rich Rod. Really fascinated to kind of see how he manages this as a team. He is very spirited, we'll say. And so we'll see if things are going south fast. I don't know that he adds to that. I think he can be a distraction as part of that based on past. Now, I don't want to judge somebody based on their past necessarily, but if things are going great, I think he can be a great motivator and a great guy to be able to lead the team. But if things are going bad, I don't know that he's necessarily the guy that's the best to rally the troops. So we'll see what happens there. The last time these 2 teams played were on December 26, 2017 in the Heart of Dallas Bowl. Utah won 30-14. I remember this game vividly because it was kind of a boring game, quite honestly. I hated the game. I got sick and was trying to limp to the finish line as I get to my Uber to get to the plane. This was one of the stupidest trips I've ever made in my entire life. I decided to fly in that morning and then caught a flight that night, all while I was sick, wasn't feeling great. there's not a lot that I can remember about this, and I think I was dead for like a week after. So not a lot of fond memories for me here. It was the Zaxby's Chicken Heart of Dallas Bowl, and we got no Zaxby's. We got actually terrible barbecue. Just all around, it was not a great situation. They didn't even give us drinks. I mean, it was like we couldn't even get water. It was just not a great situation. And so my feelings on this aren't too great. But Utah holds a 2-0 record against West Virginia all time. Nothing too crazy. Just it is what it is. Coming into the season, West Virginia is projected to win 5.5 games. They're, according to SP Plus, have the 53rd hardest schedule. They rank 57th in the SP Plus coming into the season. So, a decent schedule for a team trying to rebound, but nothing that is necessarily going to jump off the page initially. This is a team that, the defense let them down last year. The offense was decent in almost all categories, but for the most part, the defense let them down. This team was 27th in rushing offense, but 110th in scoring defense, 111th in total defense, 126th in passing defense, and 132nd in opponent third down conversions out of 134 teams. They essentially let teams get a conversion half the time. It was pretty easy for them. Just a few more stats here. 114th in opponent fourth down conversions, 65%. That's pretty wild. Like third and fourth downs, they were just giving up anything. So teams could go third down, fourth down. It really wasn't a concern. And then in the red zone, it wasn't any better. 101st in opponent red zone conversions at 87.5%. They were 98th in sacks, 112th in turnover margin. Like it wasn't a great situation for this West Virginia team, and it was clear that there needed to be a change. And so they went back to the well and got Rich Rodriguez. Like I said, Rodriguez is a run-based spread offense. He likes no huddles. He likes tempo, which if it's working well, can be a very challenging offense to play, right? You just have to kind of stay on your toes. You have to work well. This presents a big challenge for Utah in the sense that you're traveling across country. Depending on how that defense is moving, there's been issues with tackling in the past. There's issues with pass rushing in terms of just getting those havoc plays. If things aren't going well for Utah, this becomes a real worry, right? We've seen in years past where those no-huddle tempo offenses sometimes get Utah off kilter with their defense. It takes Utah some time to kind of acclimate and get ready for it. Utah sometimes, gets their signals in a little too late, and so then there's a lot of chaos on the field. We've seen that in years past. And so if Rodriguez can get his offense to be efficient and Utah's defense isn't kind of up to snuff yet at that point, this could be a real worry, right? I still don't know that West Virginia has the dogs to be able to just kind of blow you away, right? Like I think if you give this type of offense in 2-3 years when Rich Rod can get a little bit more of his players, have maybe more skilled players, that becomes even more of a challenge, but this is not going to be an easy system for Utah just based on that alone. So that gives, West Virginia a big advantage in that, especially if Utah's not playing together in sync. So going into that game, that would be one of the keys to the game to me is what can that defense do against the no-huddle/tempo? You got to get those calls in faster, that kind of stuff. On the defensive side, they bring in Zach Alley. He was previously with Oklahoma. This is a great hire. He had the 19th best defense last year. He's known for his aggressive schemes with a 3-man front. He'll switch to 4-2-5s every once in a while, but this is a guy that will put pressures on teams, right? He's going to load up the box. He's going to do whatever he can to make it so that you can't pass the ball in a comfortable manner, right? He's going to do different things to make sure that you're in a world of hurt. And it worked tremendously at Oklahoma. For all the bad that Oklahoma was last year, the defense was not it. Their defense was really solid. They were stacked. Now, with that said, this is not the same as Oklahoma's defense last year, right? The guys on the roster are not the same. And so it's not going to quite be to that level, but at the same time, you're going to start seeing what he can do there, what kind of defense this can be. Do they have the dogs to be able to do it? That kind of stuff. So you've got an aggressive style of play on both sides of the ball where you've got Rich Rod trying to go no huddle and tempo, trying to push teams. It either works really fast and that offense is keeping guys on the field for a long time, gassed, and they're not subbing out a ton. The whole Utah will slow it down type situation. On the same time, if that offense doesn't work and you go tempo, it has potential to be really dangerous in the sense that you go 3 and out super fast. And so that side of the ball, you're going to be aggressive. On the defensive side, you're going to be really aggressive. There's a lot that can happen in this game based on either one of those, right? You could have a team that comes in and is just bad on both sides of the ball, and Utah can do whatever they want with it, or they can be a menace on offense, they can be a menace on defense. I think they're probably going to be somewhere in the middle there, but this is not an easy out. Looking at kind of the transfer portal / everything that happened with this West Virginia team, they lost 51 players in the portal. This is the most in all of college football. It was a crazy amount of turnover. They had 52 players incoming, so they essentially replaced almost a majority of their staff, right? Or roster, I should say. This is a team that is completely rebuilt. It's something that like even Deion Sanders hasn't done. This is a complete overhaul of a team. And so there's going to be a lot of questions about what this team can be. A lot of the players that left, majority of them I would say went to the G6 route. Not a lot of them went to another power program. There was a handful, don't get me wrong, and there's a lot of good players that went to other good programs. Those were poached by a lot of good schools that saw the writing on the wall when Neil Brown was gone and took them. A lot of those guys don't want to go through a rebuild with Rich Rodriguez, and you want to go to a program with more stability. The top guys there that they lost is an inside offensive lineman in Thomas Rimac. He went to West Virginia, highly rated for the team, but he wasn't alone. 4 other offensive linemen went to Virginia Tech as well from this squad. C.J. Donaldson, one of their running backs, one of the better running backs on the program, went to Ohio State. He was their 3rd leading rusher. Another offensive tackle joined him at Ohio State, and so you have a lot of talent there. And then one of their better wide receivers in Hudson Clement, he was actually their leading receiver, better being a loose term, went to Illinois. He's joined by running back Murphy Clement, who also went to Illinois. So there's a lot of players that kind of converged in a lot of these same areas. But yeah, you're losing your leading receiver. You're losing your 3rd leading rusher. You're losing all of your offensive line, essentially. And so it's a tough situation to kind of rebuild. Looking at what they brought in, it's pretty crazy. Like, they brought in 9 wide receivers, 8 inside offensive linemen, 10 total offensive linemen, 7 corners, 5 safeties, and then it kind of pairs down from there. You got 4 running backs, 4 tight ends, 4 linebackers, and then the rest I'm not going to get into. But it's pretty crazy how many players they brought in specifically in certain positions, right? Like, you retooled your entire wide receiver room. You retooled your entire offensive line room. You retooled your entire secondary, basically, and you're hoping that all of this works together. There's opportunities there where, like I said, Texas Tech, they brought in a lot of players, but it's different, right? They were upgrading. They already had kind of a firm plan in some of these spots, and they were bringing in much higher rated guys to fill in there. Here, you're hoping that these wide receivers hit. You're hoping that an offensive line can gel. You're hoping that your secondary isn't going to get lost and has communication. This is a tall task for a West Virginia team that finished 52nd in recruiting with 28 recruits. I mean, there's a lot of unknown about this program. Like I said, though, they have the talent and they've got the kind of play calling that will help them if things are going right. So here's a look at some of the players that you can kind of focus in on. Right now, the odds-on favorite to win the quarterback position starting job, is Nico Marchial. I apologize if I'm butchering that last name. He had some backups reps to Garrett Green, who was their starter quarterback last year. He finished with 434 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on 66.1% passing. I would assume that he's the guy. He runs the ball somewhat, not a ton, 120 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. But he's the odds-on favorite to do it as a redshirt junior. That's kind of there. But he's going to be battling out with Texas A&M transfer Jalen Henderson, and then Charlotte transfer Max Brown. Max Brown, he was the backup there at Charlotte. He had 561 yards, 3 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and only completed 46% of his passes. So, we'll see. Like I said, Nico's probably the guy that is the starter, but I don't know, right? There's a lot of unknown there. Now, as part of this, the biggest name returning, though, I would say on both sides of the ball is Jaheim White. This is a junior running back who was their leading rusher. He comes back after a year of 844 yards, 7 touchdowns. He averages 5.7 yards per attempt. Really phenomenal talent that is going to help this team. So for all of the inconsistencies that are there on the offensive side of the ball, Jaheim White is probably the best and the focal point of that, especially in this no-huddle tempo offense. He's going to be relied upon a lot, especially as they like to run the ball a ton. This is going to be a great opportunity for West Virginia to have some consistency there. Consistency, I don't know, matters here because you've got a new coaching staff. This is essentially a new team. He's just a holdover from the year before. So obviously has talent, can be really good, but curious to see how he fits into Rich Rod's system. 2 other running backs that are joining him is Northern Iowa transfer Ty Edwards. He was the leading rusher there, finished with 1,012 yards, 6 touchdowns. This is a guy that can absolutely push Jaheim White. I would assume you kind of see a 1-2 punch between them, however order it shakes out. Just because Jaheim White was the starter last year, or at least the leading rusher last year, doesn't mean that he will be this year. But you do have 2 proven guys there. You also get a senior in SMU transfer, Jalen Knighton. Hasn't had a ton of play, but he's going to provide some depth to give this room a ton. Outside of that, wide receivers is another interesting position group where Rodney Gallagher III, he returns as one of the only other players on the offensive side of the ball in the slot, finished as the 4th leading receiver with 288 yards, 3 touchdowns. Talented player that will most likely be factored into there. But you do get 3 talented wide receivers from the portal in Cam Vaughn from Jacksonville State, Oren Singleton from Eastern Michigan, and Christian Hamilton from North Carolina. Cam Vaughn is probably the star here as the X-receiver, 803 yards and 5 touchdowns last year with an average depth of 16.7. That's pretty remarkable. He's going to go deep. He's going to be somebody to focus in on. Oren Singleton finished with 639 yards and 2 touchdowns, was the 3rd leading receiver at Eastern Michigan. You got some talent there. So beyond that, you've got an entirely replaced offensive line. You've got guys that are going to have to come in and really work to be able to be on the same page. They brought in some good talent, but at the same time, it's not something that's going to blow you away, right? So we'll see what happens there. I always look at offensive lines, and if they haven't played together and they haven't had a time to gel together, that's a real concern. You may have all the great pieces behind you. You may have a great quarterback behind you, but at the same time, if you can't do it right and you can't get that offensive line to gel, it's going to be a long nightmare. You saw that with Shadir Sanders at Colorado. Honestly, I think he could have been better if he had a better offensive line, but he was running for his life every single down. And, he's a different type of talent where he could make it work. But at the same time, I don't think a majority of the quarterbacks, especially with what West Virginia has, I think make it work with a bad offensive line. On the defensive side, the top returner is Edward Vesterinen. He's a defensive tackle, was one of their better defenders. But you're essentially replacing an entire defensive line. You're replacing an entire linebacker unit, cornerback unit, safety unit. This is an entire defense that is bringing in a bunch of new guys. And so as much as they can be talented and they can be some of the best in the respective programs that they came from, this is not an easy task to be able to get that to work together. So to me, just the biggest question with this program is kind of what do the transfers look like, right? What does this program look like based on that? You could be the Arizona State type team where you build and move forward, and Rich Rod could be this genius again at West Virginia, but I just don't see it being this year. They can be a team that provides some damage to other teams. They can be a disruptor, but I just don't think that they have the dogs to be able to compete at a high level this season. It'll be a growing year. It'll be a year where they can try to make some noise, and maybe you kind of instill some of that Rich Rod mentality with it, but I don't imagine this team competing. With that being said, with this being a cross-country travel, with this being a hostile environment of West Virginia, these guys love to be able to be loud and boisterous and rowdy. If things aren't going well for Utah, this absolutely becomes, I wouldn't call it a trap game, but this absolutely becomes a very dangerous game for Utah, depending on however they are, right? If you're 4-0 going into this game, it's still going to be a tough game. If you're, 2-2, whatever, it's still going to be a tough game, right? No matter how you view this is going to be a very difficult game. You can't overlook this by any means. You can't, just hope to come into West Virginia, Morgantown, and expect to get a win because of where they're picked to finish. This is a team that is going to be a tough out. Now, with that said, Utah, depending on how they play, this could be pretty easy. Who knows? But I still think this is going to be one of those games you have to respect. You have to be ready for it. You'll have some tape on them to at least know what they are, especially with that Pitt game, especially with the game before them, which was, sorry, my notes are all the way up top. The game before, wow, I'm all over the place. Kansas, there you go. So you've got some good tape on this team. You'll understand what's going on, but a tough situation. Let's jump into Arizona State. So Arizona State, obviously the reigning champions. This is the team that was picked last, that rose from the ashes and came up and won the entire conference. Really surprised a lot of teams. Just kind of caught people off guard, right? Like they were building momentum and you saw that they were there, but it was a team that really just kind of came out of nowhere. And then suddenly when they were there was nothing you could do about it. They had momentum. They were playing great football and they win the conference, right? Good team. Now, with this, Utah gets the Sun Devils at home a week after a bye. So you go to West Virginia, you get your first bye week, and then you finish out the first half of your season with a home game against Arizona State. That's a great opportunity, right? You get that bye week, a great time to recharge. The situation here, though, is Arizona State also gets a bye week. So there's no real clear advantage in terms of, one team is not with the bye and the other team is coming, whatever it may be. This is two teams that are going to have 2 weeks to prepare for each other, which can be a very dangerous situation for both sides of the ball, right? We'll see kind of how the in-game adjustments, the length of this. I know Kyle Whittingham has always kind of been looked at as give him time and he'll do well, but we saw last year that it didn't matter the time if your team isn't great. So we'll see what happens. Prior to this game, so this game's being played on October 11th. This is actually the first game of a 6-week stretch where Utah will stay in the state of Utah. They do travel to BYU, but for 6 weeks they're in the state of Utah. And so it's a real, I don't want to call it easy, but it's a great stretch for Utah in this schedule to be able to stay home. You're not worrying about traveling. You're staying in your own beds. They do sleep in their own, a hotel, the night before, but you get the point. You're in familiar territory. Coming into this game, Arizona State will have played Mississippi State in week 2, and that one, depending on how Mississippi State rebounds this year, that could be a very tough out. It's on the road. It's going to be a tough situation. They have to go to at Baylor in week 4. They have TCU in week 5. Then they have their bye. They then have Texas Tech the week after Utah. So not that I think Arizona State is going to be overlooking Utah. None of these teams, I think, are going to be overlooking each other. They now have to prepare for Texas Tech the week after. So this could be a difficult stretch after the bye of a 1-2 punch of Utah and Texas Tech. And so this isn't going to be an easy situation for Arizona State. Arizona State finishes last year 11-3, 8-2 in Big 12 play. Obviously wins the conference. They got the number 4 seed in the kind of weird rankings of the college football playoffs and have a narrow loss to Texas. Sorry, had to get a drink. They finished number 7 in the final AP Top 25. Just a really solid team. A lot of expectations about them. Utah's game against them last year. Obviously, Utah's familiar with Arizona State. They've been playing them since they got in the Pac-12 and before that, years ago in the WAC. This was on October 11th, which happens to be the exact same day as their new game. They played them on Friday. They'll play them on Saturday. You get the point. They go to Tempe. They lose 27-19. This was the Cam Rising game. This is the last game that you're going to see of Cam Rising in college football. And, there was a ton of pressure for him to play that game. He wasn't fully healthy. You could see that. He also got injured in the game, which only added to the problems. This was just a nightmare for Utah all around. It was one of those games where it felt to me like the old Yeller game, right? Like, just get him off the field, take him, put him out of his misery. Not quite that level, right? Like, I'm not saying we're not going to go there. But, like, you felt bad for Cam Rising the longer this game went on. And it just felt like, Utah kept pushing and pushing and pushing and keeping him there. There was a spirited conversations after that talking about, was this Cam's choice? Was this the coaching staff choice? Cam essentially wanted to stay here. And Kyle, with the love and respect that he had for Cam Rising, wanted him to do whatever he could. The unfortunate part here is it was not a great situation for Utah. And I'm not saying that the results would have changed if you had Isaac Wilson or Brandon Rose in that game, but I think you could have had a better chance potentially. It's just unfortunate that, after a long career for Cam Rising that was good, that's the last memory that most fans are going to have of him. So, unfortunate, this is not going to be the Cam Rising game, right? Like, you're not going to have him. This is going to be a new era. You've got a new QB. Utah hopes that they don't have any injuries at this point, especially in that position. But we'll see how it goes. So, the score, it's not that far off. It's an 8-point game. It was actually, I would argue, I would contend, we'll say, that this game was closer than the score represents. It wasn't until late that Cam Scattaboo really broke away. There were some passes that kind of errant passes that went out, and it just kind of snowballed, and Utah lost all the momentum. But this was a game that wasn't necessarily a guarantee for Arizona State the entire time, despite terrible, terrible play from Cam Rising, mostly because of injury. So it is what it is. Arizona State is projected to win 8.5 games this year. They have a pretty easy schedule. It's ranked 61st by SP Plus, and SP Plus sees them as the number 22 team. So similar, actually, to what Phil Steele had at 23, I believe. Is that what I said? Yeah, probably. That's a good spot for them. But this is a team that obviously was very close to beating Texas. Cam Scattaboo was phenomenal for this team. He was kind of the it factor for them. Obviously, Sam Levitt emerged as a star QB, and we'll talk about him. But it was a story of Cam Scattaboo. And this is maybe my hot take, and I know it's not going to go over well with some people, but I don't think that Arizona was this elite team. Well, they weren't. They were a good to great team that just had the benefit of Cam Scattaboo. Now, look, I'm not trying to erase all their success or rewrite history and say that it was only Cam Scattaboo, and that's the only reason. So don't come at me with that and say that, I get it. There's more pieces than that. But I think with what Scattaboo did for that team really elevated them to the level where they were at, right? At the end of the day, these teams have to be, you have to have kind of that fight in you. And if it's Cam Scattaboo or it's another player doing things late in the game, it's a team effort, right? So I get that. But I think if you take Scattaboo out of this, it completely changes the success here. And obviously, right? Like if you take a certain star player from any team, it's going to change that. So I'm not trying to dog on this team too much. But I don't think this team was as great as many expected. There were far better teams in the conference that just didn't have that extra push or that extra fight late to get them over the hump, right? Arizona State had a few games that were close games that they've, Scattaboo just did his thing. Levitt did his thing. And there just wasn't anything jumping off the page from the stats point as a team that really kind of showed them as this elite team. Now, with that being said, they finished 20th in rushing offense, a.k.a. Cam Scattaboo, 28th in total offense, a.k.a. Cam Scattaboo / Levitt. Levitt's in there. I'm not trying to discredit that once again. And then 21st in rushing defense. I'll get to that, right? That helped. But by and large, if you look at the stats, and I'll include it in that article that I have that'll publish this, it's good but not great, right? This is a good team. And at the end of the day, you have to win in those clutch moments, right? And you can have teams, I could argue that Utah's second Pac-12 championship wasn't an elite team. right? The year before was a much better team. But sometimes you're just the team that wins. And so that's not to take anything away from these programs. There's a lot of success that goes into that, but not every team is built the same. Not every team wins the same rate. I just don't think that Arizona State is as good, or at least wasn't as good as their record / how they finished showed. Maybe that's the hottest take that I can give, but I just don't see it. Now, with that said, this is a team that is bringing back a ton of returning production, basically their entire starting unit on both sides of the ball. There's like a couple pieces that they're moving on from. But for the most part, this is the same team. The benefit that they had last year is they played with house money. They were the team that nobody expected to win. They could go in there, and if you lost, nobody was going to look at you and say, yeah, Arizona State, how dare you do that? Like, this is a team that if you win, cool. You just, you beat the projections, everything that way. If you lose, so be it. You weren't expected to win anything anyway. There's something to that. We saw that with BYU somewhat last year as well. Now, I would argue that BYU was a better team. Cougars fans don't want to hear that because they didn't get into the championship game. I get that. But I would argue that by and large, the Cougars were a better top to bottom team. The difference was Arizona State found the ways to get the wins. And it was marginal, right? Like BYU was right there. But this is a team that is now going to have the expectations placed on them. They're going to have a lot of stress trying to be able to live up to that. And that's going to be the biggest issue there. Real quick, I don't want to keep this podcast going on too far, but in the transfer portal, they lost 22 players. Good names, but nothing earth-shattering. Like I said, they basically returned their entire starting unit, and so you're keeping your starters intact. Cam Scadaboo obviously leaves. That's the biggest loss, I would say, but that's not because of the transfer portal. They bring in 16 players in the transfer portal and upgrade in some good spots. The biggest names here would be Jalen Moss, a wide receiver from Fresno State. He was their second leading receiver at 563 yards and 4 touchdowns. You also have a wide receiver from Alabama in Jaron Hamilton. He's nicknamed Turbo for his speed. Didn't have any stats last year, but this is a guy that is projected to be a good talent there. You pair that with what they already have at wide receiver, which I'll get to in a sec, and this could be dangerous. You also bring in a running back in Kanye Udo. Sorry, Cam Levitt, you're gone. Now you've got Kanye Udo, who, for Army finished with 1,117 yards and 10 touchdowns as their second leading rusher. Obviously knows how to run. That system is built on that. And so you've got great potential there to kind of replace Cam Scadaboo. So like I said, of the returning, there's 16 of the 22 starters, or at least guys that have starting experience. It's hard to sometimes quantify that, but it's a team that is loaded, and you replaced positions that essentially were absent, or you upgraded. So starting with Sam Levitt is a phenomenal talent, and I'm not taking anything away from him. This is the star of the Big 12, I would say, especially coming into the season. There may be quarterbacks that can do better than him in the end, but I would say Sam Levitt is the leader of the pack. And if he can continue to make upgrades in his game, he becomes very dangerous. He finished with 2,885 yards with 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, completed 61.7% of his passes. He also added 443 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns as a dual threat talent. He was the second leading rusher. This is a guy that, I would assume just has so much more confidence coming into this next year. Yes, teams will scheme at him a little bit different because now they know what to expect, but I think there's potential here for him to really kind of have a breakout year, which sounds crazy because he did have that last year, but I think he could be even better this year. But all those pieces have to still work, right? The guys that he's throwing to is arguably one of the best wide receivers in the conference, and that's Jordan Tyson. This is a guy that is a phenomenal talent, finished with 1,100 yards last year and 10 touchdowns. He's going to be the number one target. And if those two can sync up, Levitt and Jordan Tyson can sync up again, he becomes a very dangerous weapon for Arizona State to repeat and to be able to challenge in the Big 12 because of these two alone. You then add Jalen Moss, as I mentioned, and Jaron Hamilton, and you've got a good amount of talent there. There's obviously more talent in there. Guys that have been in the background, guys that are moving up, going to have kind of their break this year. But I think this room is going to be a talented room with Jordan Tyson leading that charge. So he's going to be the guy that you focus, the guy that you maybe bracket coverage against him, right? Like try to help take away his game and then see what other people can do. In that backfield, as I mentioned, you do have Kanye Udo. We'll see how he factors in, but you do have the expected starter right now of Kyson Brown. He was their third best rusher last year with 351 yards and 2 touchdowns. With Cam Scatterbo, there's not a lot of yards to go around, but Kyson Brown expected to be a solid talent. You also have Raleek Brown, formerly from USC years ago, only played in 2 games last year, got injured, and so there's not been a ton. Honestly, he's only played 4 games over the last 2 years based on some injuries that he's had. So, he has talent based on what we've expected to see from him. He could absolutely factor into this, but injuries have played a pivotal role in his production the last few years. So we'll see there. But even if you just get Kyson Brown and Kanye Udo, I think they've got enough there to be able to do a lot of damage, especially if you've got the threat in Jordan Tyson as wide receiver. You've got a great tight end. I'm blanking on his name. I apologize. He had something like 300 yards. But he was an all-conference tight end, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on his name, but he's going to be another addition. In your offensive line, you return 4 of your 5 starters. So as I mentioned, this is partially why I think this is a team that is good but not elite, and they need to take the jump up. Pass blocking, they got a 78 grade from PFF. Run blocking, though, they only got a 58.4, which is wild considering what Cam Scatterbo was able to do. You didn't get great run blocking grades, and yet you still had a phenomenal talent in Scatterbo. So it really shows kind of his effort and level. I have to assume that with 4 of the 5 starters returning, both of those numbers have potential to go up. You'll start to see better opportunities there. You get more in sync. So really fascinated there on how that moves forward. On the defensive side of the ball, they do have leaders at every level. You have Clayton Smith as a defensive end, which will be a guy to focus in on. Keyshawn Elliott, linebacker, and Xavion Alford as a safety. He's the team's best player on defense, according to PFF. Was a great tackler and their best in coverage. So there's leaders here. They've got pieces around these guys, and so there's really something to like about this defense. But it's not one of those defenses that keeps you up at night, right? It's good. It's above average, but it's not great. And so I'm curious to see kind of what Kenny Dillingham can do the next year. What can he do with this team? We know the offense can be good, and I think they'll be, if not, they'll probably be on par. Maybe they take a step back a slight without Cam Scatterbo. I disagree with kind of me saying that. I think they actually can be right on par about with that. But the defense has to improve if this team wants to repeat or at least be in contention with that. So really fascinated to kind of see what happens. My biggest questions here is just how do you move on from Cam Scatterbo? How do you live life as the hunted and not the hunter? Dillingham already said in the spring meetings that he hates it. He doesn't like it. That doesn't mean that he's shying away from it, right? But it's a different situation when you've got, the nobody loves us, nobody expects us to do anything kind of mentality where you work as the underdog. He talks about wanting to be the underdog, but now you have to live at the top of the food chain. And we see a lot of teams that struggle with that. So really fascinated to kind of see how that goes. 2 tough games going into the halfway point of the season. You get a bye in between both of these with West Virginia and Arizona State. Really fascinated to see how Utah is at this point. There could be a lot of good. There could be a lot of bad. We'll see. But at this point in the season, you'll know what this Utah team is all about. Are they competing for a Big 12 championship? Are they just middle of the road? Or are they down in the dumps, down in the doldrums like they were last year? I doubt they'll be down there. They'll at least be good, I would say. That would be my expectation. But there is a real potential that they could be a much better program. And look, if you come into this at 6-0 and you're going to the back half of your schedule with that, having wins over Texas Tech and Arizona State, the sky's the limit, right? I don't think that's where Utah will be. But look, anything can happen. I don't think this front part of the schedule is impossible to have a 6-0 record, especially when you get Texas Tech and Arizona State at home. But this is not an easy easy schedule to make that a task, especially coming off the year that they had. So, expect 1 or 2 losses down there. Even if you're at 4-2 coming into this stretch, assuming that you've lost to the right teams, I think everything's still on the table. Anything less than 4-2, though, is kind of a bit of a downer. 3-3, you're still there, but there's going to be a lot of talk about, has Utah peaked, right? And we're still talking about that 2 years ago. So really curious to see how this goes. After this first part of the week, or first part of the schedule, you now move into your quote-unquote rivals with BYU and Colorado. Obviously, 2 different types of teams, 2 different types of games that will be interesting as well. And so really looking forward to kind of what that will be. But that's our episode today. Sorry I went a little long. There was a lot to talk about today. So for all those that stayed through and listened to the end, I appreciate you. I appreciate all of you, but I appreciate the ones that listened to the very end the most. But thank you for taking the time. This is a lot of stuff to go over. Every single week there's something. I appreciate you listening and giving me the feedback that you have. So with that, we'll sign off and we'll catch you again next week.